Hello and welcome. My name's Chris Cann, Head of Mining Journal Research, and you've tuned into our technology-focused webinar as part of our stakeholder engagement program. With me, I have Robin Bolton, Senior Sustainability Executive with Health, Safety, Environmental and Social Management Software System, IsoMetrix. So thanks, Robin, and over to you.
Thank you, and hi, everyone. So today I'll be taking you through the stakeholder engagement process, and in particular, how technology can improve this. Just a little bit of background about myself. I was an environmental consultant for around 17 years, working both in environmental and social aspects, and focusing mainly on the extractives industry before joining a software company which offers the governance, risk, compliance, and sustainability solutions. So really, what are the key criteria that typical stakeholder engagement software needs to meet? It's in stakeholder engagement and management is arguably one of the most important ingredients for successful project delivery, but are often regarded as only fringe activities. So there really are three key guiding principles that I'd like to mention that are worth remembering, and these can be summarized as to engage adequately, to be transparent, and then thereafter to develop sustainable responses. So in terms of just general guidance as an upfront introduction to this talk, I've tried to summarize these in 5 points. And firstly, the system that you decide to use to help you with your whole engagement process should really be aligned to accepted international standards. Ones that I've come across are the AA1000, which is a leading methodology used by sustainability professionals. There's also the IFC guidelines, which are well known in terms of stakeholder engagements. And then secondly, that the data that is captured in the system needs to be secure and must comply with whatever country or international regulations there are in place regarding data security. I'm finding it more and more in the projects I'm involved with that it's one of the right up front questions regarding how data is managed securely in the system. So a key feature there. And then thirdly, when deciding or choosing your particular software, be aware of its capability as well as its limitations. You need to ask the right questions, and if you're not familiar or comfortable with all the requirements, involve colleagues and especially your IT departments in this whole process. Also note that when choosing your particular approach for stakeholder engagements, wherever you are located, that connectivity is a key feature that has to be considered. And I've come across a couple of projects where a software has not added the value because of the inadequate connectivity in the field where the operation was located, and this was overlooked in the beginning. And then fourthly, about historical data. Now, often there's a lot of data collected in the early stages of a project, be it exploration or the early stages of construction and operation. And then once the operation is profitable, they start spending on further IT infrastructure, including perhaps engagement software. But then there's this historical data to include. So it needs to be thought through, how is this going to be incorporated into the system? Are you going to upload it, or is that data going to feed directly into an analytical layer, such as a dashboard, so that at least you still have visuals of that historical data? So another aspect to consider. And at the end of the day, the software or system you decide really needs to be an enabler of rapid response. So through the setting of rules or thresholds and limits in terms of what data you collect, that alerts or notifications get triggered to notify the relevant or responsible person of a situation so that they can respond. So now just focusing on some of the specifics that I believe are important in choosing or using a engagement software, or where technology can certainly add value. And these are things like being able to cater for a large number of stakeholders. We're all familiar with being involved in the mining or extractive industry, that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of stakeholders that need to be basically, that you need to have visual on. And to capture all that information in the system is important. And not just basic information, but a range of information. And in this example that we see on the slide here, just some of the details that I've highlighted in red, and I'll go through those, is that you can have an upfront profile of that stakeholder individual with really the sort of upfront important information, and then getting into more detail. So perhaps a tab or a setting where you can capture more of the details, such as ID numbers and other contact numbers, and important to know what's confidential and what's not. And then things like doing an analysis of that stakeholder, understanding their interests, understanding their influence. And this gives you then the power or the intelligence to know how to manage that particular stakeholder. Other important features could include things like the relationships that stakeholder has to other stakeholders, or the relationship that stakeholder has to an entity that you might also capture in your system. So those links can also be created. And another important one I wanted to mention is the vulnerability of that particular stakeholder. So how sensitive they are to your operation, and different stakeholders will be sensitive in different ways. So be able to gather that data, have it in a central system, and being able to have visual of that information is key to successfully managing your stakeholders and knowing which ones you perhaps need to engage with more commonly than others. And one or two other quick features could be things like undertaking or scheduling visits or risk assessments of that particular stakeholder to see if your whole profile that you've set up for them is accurate. So at the end of the day, the software must certainly add value to your operation. The data that is captured needs to also be interpreted and presented in ways and formats where it adds this value, be that in a report to help with common reporting requirements, or else graphically in terms of some sort of analytical layer where it brings efficiency to those that are using that software, be it your social or risk manager on the site, be it board members, or outside of your organization, investors. So to ensure that that data then gets interpreted and presented is as an important part as gathering the information or data. And then also the ability to cater for complaints and grievances. That's one thing, being able to engage with stakeholders and use a technology to aid you in that engagement. But important to ensure that any complaint or grievance or concern gets captured, gets investigated correctly according to recognized methods, and then dealt with and closed out, so that any investor or even the operation themselves know that the risk raised from complaints and grievances is being managed adequately. And here are some, in the next few slides, examples of how data can be presented to add that value that I talk about. In this particular example here, we've got sort of an overall view of an engagement process and interaction with stakeholders. Here we can see, for example, a summary that a particular user of the system could set up for themselves, and then realize that, for that month there's still a certain amount of grievances that are open that need to be attended to, and that might raise a red flag to say, why are we behind on managing and closing out our grievances? Another useful feature that this sort of technology can bring is being able to drill down or filter out certain information so that you and whatever position you're in as a user can see that which is important to you for your decision making, and on the other hand also that from a corporate level that information gets rolled up so that they can see more of a holistic view of what's happening. And another example of perhaps on the grievance side, in particular if you drill down into the grievances, where are we with managing a whole grievance process? And through trending over time, you can also get a good level of understanding or comfort or discomfort on, how often are grievances being raised, what time of the year, is there patterns, are they coming from certain individuals? So it helps any organization know where to focus effort and energy to manage that risk. And again, examples of where technology can aid in the whole understanding of data. So this example here, Sankey diagram, really is showing the relationship in this particular example of a project area and the purpose of the different engagements that occurred within that project area, the responsible person that was managing that engagement, and then all the various stakeholders that were involved. So relationships and links can then be visualized to understand more of the situation on the ground. All right, and moving on to some more of the sort of specific requirements and functionalities that add a lot of value to systems, and again, where technology is coming into play. Some of the specifics that we find useful include things like managing responsibilities or commitments or obligations that may stem from early on in the project, from permit conditions or licenses or whatever authorizations that you may receive. So being able to then capture those obligations, have them in a central system, have notifications when perhaps obligations aren't being dealt with, ensures that you have a closer control of those obligations to ensure that they're fulfilled. Also, ability to handle multiple projects or long-term projects. A system would be a bit limited if it was siloed and just able to manage one particular operational project, but certainly if it has the ability to expand and cater for more, this again adds value to the organization where data could be rolled up to more of a corporate view. And then also dealing with the different phases of a project, gathering that data through that whole life cycle of an operation, again, aids in that particular software or technology, adding value to what you do. And then sort of coming through on some of the other items that I certainly recommend are useful, things like the notifications and alerts that I've touched on, schedulers, so a calendar view or reminders that when certain things need to be done. For example, we've set ourselves a schedule to visit this particular vulnerable stakeholder and engage with them on a monthly basis at this particular time. And then things like integrations, how easy or how practical or possible is it to integrate with other systems to pull data into your system that helps understand the data that you're collecting. We're certainly finding more and more the need for multi-language. Organizations or companies have operations in multiple jurisdictions will require that tool to be multi-language to get that full value out of it. And as was mentioned before, your mobile capability now needs to really be spot on and not just work where there's connectivity, but where there's not connectivity, then obviously sync when back in range so the data doesn't get lost. And especially with the social engagement processes and interacting with communities, more often than we realize that connectivity is not a strong feature, or the infrastructure is not there, so the offline capability needs to perform. So just to summarize some of the sort of key benefits of using software in this whole process, I can touch on I will summarize a few of them. So your automation of social performance management, this is what it brings, and this results in increasing efficiency to the whole social engagement or social sustainability management that you're offering, and should reduce costs as well. You get a standardization of your best practice across all of your operations. You get better visibility against commitments on a real-time basis. The aspect of being able to generate reports at a click of a button and visualize the data is one of the most key aspects that these systems can bring. And this does result in sustainability teams or those resources on the ground being able to spend less time managing data, reporting, writing, and actually spend more time on the strategic matters and things that are important on the ground. I've mentioned about the notifications, alerts, and reminders, talked about the increased data and information security that can occur in a centralized system, and certainly at the end of the day, it's about keeping track of your social responsibilities and being accountable. So for the second half, I just want to talk briefly about the social license to operate and touch on a few risks and ensure that any operation knows how to keep those, to keep that social license to operate. Okay, so in general, just to give you a definition for SLO, it really refers to the level of acceptance or approval by local communities and stakeholders to your particular operation. And there's certainly been an increase in the importance of your social license to operate over the last couple of decades, and it's pretty common knowledge now that your social risks really rate in some of the top facing any mining or metals operation these days. Clashes or confrontations between mining companies and communities has certainly risen steadily since the early 2000s. And there's definitely documented proof that there's been a significant number of mining projects that are delayed due to social opposition. And with that becomes the loss of production, which relates to the loss of revenue for those particular operations. Regarding your social risks, yes, they're ongoing risks. They're frequent. They can be costly, and an operation certainly needs to realize they continue and should be seen as high priority risks. So with regards to understanding your particular social setting and knowing how to sort of manage your social risks and keeping your social license, you've got to understand that every operation, every project, every setting is unique, and the risks will differ. And you've got to be able to decipher through the right studies, what are those unique and important social risks that feed into the whole sort of ESG management of that operation. So some of the points really is about undertaking those social risk assessments adequately. It's about understanding the stakeholder expectations, and that includes things from both the community members you interact with and investors. Expectations do differ, and they even differ through the different phases of the project. And just in terms of the engagement process, some principles that are worth remembering are things we can summarize into really 3 points. To engage with those stakeholders, to basically understand their expectations regarding the opportunities and needs that a project may bring, to always be transparent to those stakeholders on performance of your operation ensure that promises that were made, how they're progressing, and that you can still live up to those promises, and that you know, these stakeholders' opinions and or community opinions certainly matter. And you've got to develop innovative and sustainable responses to the issues raised. And not just in the beginning of projects, but through projects and on an ongoing basis. This particular picture I've included here was of an indigenous pygmy tribe in the Cameroonian forests, where we were conducting some social surveys of a proposed iron ore mine. And their unique and particular wish was that their hunter-gatherer culture would not be disturbed. And therefore, this unique risk needed to be managed very, very carefully. It wasn't really about economic improvements, but purely just that their livelihood wasn't going to be disturbed. I touched a little bit about the social risk assessment. This is a key part in the beginning of a project and should always be ongoing to understand those particular social risks. So really a full and thorough risk assessment needs to be undertaken right from the beginning of a project, so that those priority or high risks are understood and the right controls or mitigation measures can then be put in place. As we saw early in the presentation, you know, through analytics and interpretations of that data, then the high priority areas or the vulnerable or influential stakeholders can be identified, and then plans formulated on how best to address those particular areas or people. And certainly we've talked about how technology can bring enhancements and add value, but it is coupled with having the right resources on the ground, having the right resources, understanding and using that technology, but again, the right resources being able to interact. And so I'll certainly not encourage that resources get removed for the benefit of bringing in technology. So what are some of the key takeaways from this particular component? And that is, operators need to take responsibility of their social risks. They need to understand that social risks are real and that they can have a detrimental effect on an operation if not managed correctly. It's certainly about building trust and relationships with stakeholders, be them community members, investors, government organizations, whoever those stakeholders are. Build up that relationship, build up the trust. You know, there's no doubt that things will go wrong and incidents will happen. But it's through the building of these good relationships that these issues then can be navigated and addressed. And then in terms of mitigating those social risks, you know, engage often with your stakeholders. Ensure that the right consultation process happens and be proactive rather than reactive. Share benefits with those communities that are around your particular operation. If they see the benefits of that operation, they're certainly going to work with those operations instead of against them. And then also compensate the people fairly in terms of if it involves the resettlement process or whatever compensation they need, that whole process needs to be done responsibly. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Robin. We have got time for a few questions. I wanted to start by asking you which features of stakeholder engagement systems are mining companies finding to be the most useful in your experience?
Right. So there are several features that I find are currently proving to be a necessity or certainly a valuable feature. These, I would say, include the mobile function, which can obviously operate offline. It's important to remember the whole sort of syncing process of that data, ensure that the data is secure on your mobile device and then syncs with your platform, whatever you choose, and that there's no loss in that data.
Okay.
And then the ability to capture a bit more information about where you are using your mobile device, things like coordinates, photos, or some sort of supporting information, be it a video and so forth. So all of that seems to be where a lot of the sort of technology needs are heading to.
Okay. And just one more very quick one, if we're going to squeeze in some COVID-19 questions as well. Are the expectations of corporates and communities in regards to engagements and social license to operate, are they aligned, or are they still horribly out of step, as it's felt like that they had been up until probably very recently?
I would say that there's certainly still a gap. It has narrowed, but there's a definite gap between those expectations. And why I say this is because corporates are becoming more aware of the risks associated with the social license due to investor requirements and the pressure from investors and the real operational impact that social risks are posing and are being felt. And also there's more engagement and interactions happening now than before, so that's improved that difference. And lastly, expectations also change to different phases of the project, from exploration, I think I mentioned this, through the operation right to closure. And really any expectation that arises needs to be addressed and managed correctly right from the start, to ensure that they're managed correctly and adequately.
Okay, and it looks like we have got time for maybe 10 minutes of COVID-19 specific questions. So if you're happy to hang on, I'll open. And I wanted to start by asking the very, very basic question of do you see the use of technology changing in the mining industry coming out the back of this crisis?
I definitely think a change, yes. And this, digitization does unlock value. And what this pandemic has highlighted is the efficiency technology can bring. This will not be the last pandemic we face, and there's a need to future-proof ourselves and our operations against more disruptions, and especially to ensure that the health and well-being of employees is maintained or improved. So, yes, technology will change and become more prominent in future.
The next one, I'm just interested in your view on how the pandemic has exposed any kind of chinks in the armor of the industry in terms of stakeholder engagement. Any specific weak links that you've seen come to the fore with the current reaction to the pandemic?
It's really, stakeholder engagements, by its nature, often is requires sort of close interactions and discussions, on a much more sort of personal basis. So, and that also helps build that trust and relationship, being able to, closely engage with someone. So we will have to think how, if we stay in this current situation, or if it eases, or if it doesn't, how technology can help us still with these engagement processes, but, probably not having that personal relationship or close relationship that stakeholder engagements has previously meant.
Okay. And are there certain technologies that the industry should keep an eye on that could severely disrupt, in either a good way or a bad way, relationships with one or more stakeholder groups?
Yes. So I think probably the one that stands out is really about data and personal data and breaches that might happen regarding, confidential information. And also maybe to touch another one quickly, and that's the power of social media. And, now most people are connected in some way or another, and this can add value and be great, or it could be detrimental to a company's reputation, depending on what those stakeholders are saying. So it may be factual or fake, but that's one of the sort of big disruptions that technology could bring in, and it's difficult to recover from those damages.
Another question about the opportunity that the industry is being presented with here. Did you see the current crisis as an opportunity to enhance stakeholder engagement, or can you see the big risk on the downside that that the industry will kind of kick some of these programs that have been so important in the past 1 to 3 years or so, kick those into the long grass?
Just a very quick thing to add to that. Yes, it's created sort of opportunities and the need to invent and come up with ways. But my circle and the people I interact with and talk to, it's really this whole travel blanket travel restrictions that has negatively impacted the whole stakeholder engagements. People can't get out to meet and engage. So that's just the one little point I wanted to add about the travel restrictions that have been hard to get around in terms of what this pandemic has brought.
Okay, we're unfortunately out of time, so all that's left is for me to thank Robin Bolton from IsoMetrix for a fantastic session, and to thank everyone who's tuned in. Bye for now.